Hello and welcome to the Conquering History channel. Thank you for joining me. If you found this video, then you're somebody who's curious about the anime Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Or you have a friend who's really into the series and he's showing you this video, or she, to try and convince you to watch it. Well, here's the short version of why you should watch it. It's a combination of the space battles featured in Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica with the political intrigue of Dune and Game of Thrones. So, if that was enough to you, link to part 1 should be in the description below, and I hope you'll enjoy this journey. Oh, that's not enough for some of you? Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 7 excellent reasons why you should watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes. But I want to make something clear before I start. If you're somebody who's just finished watching Lane for the 4th time in a row, and now you want to watch something else, I would encourage you to watch this series, but you clearly are already deep enough into anime that you don't need me to convince you. Go watch the series. You need to watch the series if you want to really understand anime, and you need to have an opinion on it. This video is more directed to people who have maybe never watched anime, or if they have, they've only seen it in maybe dubbed, or it's whatever they could just catch on Toonami or on Netflix, so they don't have a dozens and dozens long list of anime that they have watched. This video is for them, so let's go ahead and get started. The first reason that you should watch Legend of Galactic Heroes is the characters. This is a show that literally has more characters that exist in the Japanese alphabet. But while I have seen shows that have as many characters as Legend of the Galactic Heroes in it, I've seen animes that have as many characters as the Legend of the Galactic Heroes in it. I have never seen a show with so many characters and yet still such a depth of characterization. Now while each side, both the Free Planets Alliance and the Empire, has its own main character in the form of Yang Wen-li and Reinhard von Lohengram, they each also have a cast herd, if you will, of characters around them. Their subordinates, their peers, their superiors, and each of them is fully fleshed out and realized as well. You understand the goals of these characters, you understand their personalities, their motivations. And in this picture here, I can honestly say that every person in this photograph is somebody who receives a depth, and that you will understand them in such a way that if you had 10 different people watch this show, then they would probably pick 10 different personalities here as their favorite character, because they're each different and they each are bringing something unique to the table. The second reason that you should watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes is that anybody in it can die at any time. Now, I'm not saying this to try to convince you to watch this show because it's shocking or it's edgy. It's merely a realistic show. This is a show that takes place during a war that's been going on for 150 years at the start of the series. I'm bringing it up because in this show, when someone dies, they stay dead. There's been a trend that I think is very awful in media lately, where characters will die, even main characters will die, but there's little if any consequences. They just do this for shock value. I'm going to throw some spoilers out here, so if you don't want to hear them, skip ahead about 30 seconds. But this has been done in Attack on Titan, where the main character dies in, I think, episode 5 or 6. And did anybody really go to Batman vs. Superman and think that Superman was dead? That final frame was completely unnecessary. Okay, spoilers are over now. But this is a show where when people die, there's consequences to it, people react to it, and there's no deaths that happen for the sake of somebody dying. They all are meant to influence the other people in the show in a certain way. But one of the things that makes this show great is that they're not afraid to kill somebody, because there's no rules that somebody cannot die. The only rule in art when it comes to death is that what does that death mean? How is it going to affect the other characters that knew that person? How is it going to affect the story as a whole? And what is going to happen as a result of that character deathing? There's nobody here who is immune. The third reason that you should watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes is because of its animation style. Now, I've heard this show criticized because of its characters' body types looking more or less all the same. And this is true. This is because they are in a military uniform, so from the neck down, everyone more or less looks the same, except maybe you're a little bit skinnier or you're a little bit fatter than whatever the standard model is. However, where the series shines is in its the animation of the faces. They look relatively realistic, particularly compared to other anime. And I feel they do a very good job in making sure that everybody has a unique face, be it their hairstyle, their hair color, the shape of their face. And it is done in a way that, while the show is very helpful and it presents title cards of characters frequently so that you can remember who everybody is, I think that you would be able to keep track of who everyone is just based on their faces. And while the animation is relatively poor, particularly in the first season, the animators do make an effort to show you what a person is conveying through their facial expression as often as they can. You could tell when somebody is looking particularly sinister. There'll be close-ups where their eyes are very expressive. When somebody is clearly in love or clearly happy or angry or wistful, this is often conveyed just through the characters' faces, which is very good in a long-running anime like this that already has a lot of narration. This show does try to show you something whenever it can, as opposed to telling you it directly. The fourth reason that you should watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes is its music. While it does have its own original opening and ending songs like most animes do, the vast majority of the music that you hear in the series is classic orchestral music. This continues with a long tradition of invoking space with orchestral music. This dates back to Gustav Holst and his Planet Symphony, 2001 from Stanley Kubrick and its famous music. You have Star Wars, of course, which was very influenced in of itself by Gustav Holst. And then now you have The Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which was done in the late 80s, using orchestral music to invoke the majesty of space. And you'll often hear this music during a battle. Sometimes they will just cut out all speaking roles entirely while a battle plays out. For example, in the very first movie, the central battle of that film takes place almost entirely silently, with only the music of Bolero by Ravel. And that's about a 15-minute long track. They don't play the entire 15 minutes without anybody speaking, but I think you might understand what I'm trying to say here. So there's not only Ravel, there's later 19th century conductors such as Verdi, you have Schubert, there's, of course, you have Mozart and Beethoven, particularly on the Alliance side, because they are the Prussian and German representatives, so they get the German composers for the most part. So if you're somebody who doesn't like classical music, this probably sounds like a turn-off to you, but I wasn't really too into orchestral music either, but then I began to listen to the music on this show, and it's pretty interesting stuff. Even if you don't grow to love classical music, I think you'll get a different appreciation for it after watching this series. Reason number 5 is the actual space battles. Now, this show does space battles very well because there are no two battles in this series that are exactly the same. Each one is uniquely different. They all take place in space, of course. However, there's always other factors that our characters have to consider. What sort of planets are nearby? Could the planet be so big that its gravity is affecting the situation, or perhaps there's a black hole? Is there a battle that's going on in the atmosphere of that planet? What's the atmosphere of that planet like? And there's also, of course, the larger context. Maybe there's one side that's fighting a battle and they've been abandoned, and the other side has some reinforcements on the way, and they just need to hold on. Like maybe a battle is taking place as a distraction and something else is going on somewhere else in the universe. And of course you have battles that are between different commanders, so the different commanders' personalities are always extremely important in how a battle is conducted. You might have an admiral who's very bold, who's very aggressive. He doesn't really think his actions through, and he's going up against somebody who might have an inferior force but is much more calm and collected, and he knows how to read the situation better so that he can he can perhaps win with an inferior force. And then to go to a smaller scale, you don't just have these huge ships firing lasers and missiles at one another. You also have infantrymen. You have these men whose job it is to get on these smaller ships, and they board the big ships, and they just start to clear through it with axes, which I know might sound strange since this takes place very far in the future, and that like how do axes get involved in a world where there's laser guns? Well, it's explained in the show, and I think they do a good job explaining it. It's enough for me to suspend my disbelief. And you'll also see the consequences of these violent fights that happen in the ship hallways, where just men's heads are getting chopped in half and there's just blood everywhere. It gets very violent at times. And you also have the pilots, very reminiscent of Star Wars, the pilots of these ships whose job it is to go out and try to take down these larger ships. And they each have interesting names. The Empire's sides are actually called Valkyries, more references to Germany. And the Alliance call their pilots Spartanians. So if you're looking for big, huge battles where literally thousands and thousands of ships are engaging one another in space, well, you've come to the right place. Reason number 6 to watch Legend of the Galactic Heroes is the political intrigue that goes on. While this takes place during this decades-long war between these two countries, that doesn't mean either of these countries is perfect. There's still political scheming that goes on behind the scene, both on the Alliance side and the Empire side. And if you're somebody who is a fan of the Dune series or a fan of Song of Ice and Fire, also known as Game of Thrones on TV, and you like that kind of behind-the-scenes scheming and manipulation and, the Game of Thrones, as it were, then you're really going to like this series. I unfortunately cannot talk about it too much because I'm trying to keep this spoiler-free, but things that happen well behind the battle lines have significant effects on things that happen on the ships when they go to war, and that's all I'm going to say. And finally, the 7th reason why you should watch Legend of Galactic Heroes is because it is ultimately an allegory for our own world and human history. And this is the reason why I'm featuring it on this channel, which is mostly just history lectures. It is a show that references our own human history and parallels it and contrasts itself to it in many ways. For example, the Free Planets Alliance, one of the two major sides of the war, is an allegory of a late 20th century democracy. It's become bloated, it's become corrupt, it doesn't quite have the energy that it used to, and I'm trying to talk about these references to our own history in such a way that doesn't spoil the series, but all I can really tell you is that there is going to be times when you watch the show and you go, especially if you're more history minded, and say, oh, that person is clearly meant to be a Napoleon type figure or like an Alexander the Great type figure. This person is meant to be an allegory for Hitler, for example. And when we get to episodes like that, there is a character who does not exist in the main show. He's somebody who's in their own history, still hundreds of years in our own future, but who's meant to be Hitler, but with a twist. So when we get to episodes that talk about that person, I'll go into more detail saying what the show might be trying to say by having a character like this. There's also a lot of themes, these overarching themes that exist in the show that are still relevant today. Is it better to live in an authoritarian government if that government is still good and it's efficient, or is it better to live in a democratic society that is bad in that it is inefficient and it's slow and it's corrupt? Which of these is better? Now, I'm not saying either side here is perfect. There is very little black and white in this show. But I think that through watching this show, we can be entertained, but also it could spark up a dialogue, particularly in regards to terrorism. Now, terrorism is something in the show that is going to become very relevant. It's going to become something that drives the plot along, and I think it's something that people can relate to because terrorism is becoming more and more of a part of our world, but it's something that's been around for a long time. I mean, this show was written in the late 80s, and that was well before the events of 9/11 or the invasion of Afghanistan or Paris attacks or any of the things that happen now are very much at the forefront of how this show works. And there's also smaller questions, more philosophical questions that are going to come up over the course of the series. questions of honor and military code, and what is the role of the military in a society, what's the role of politicians in a society, who should run the world, how should they run the world, when is it right to overthrow government, when is government bad, or is there a difference between a government that's bad and something that's slow, corruption, and on and on and on. I'll go into more detail about all these things over the course of the review, but for now, thank you for joining me on this video, and I got news for you. If you stuck around this long, then you're going to want to watch the series. You clearly are interested enough, and so I'm going to put a link to the description as soon as I can to part 1 of our review. We're going to begin actually with a movie, not with an episode, and I'll explain why when we get there. So subscribe if you want to follow along as I upload more parts to the Legend of Galactic Hero reviews. It's going to take about a year, I think, to go through the whole thing, maybe a little bit faster. The goal is going to be to finish this series before the new one gets rebooted next year, so that way you can tell your friends, like, oh, I watched the original version of this series, so I know what's really going on here. So thanks for joining me, and comment below if you have any questions about Legend of the Galactic Heroes.